We are commemorating today the institution of the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass. The Mass of the Lord's Supper every year is the anniversary, or you might say the celebration of the birthday of the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass, and it's also the celebration of the anniversary of the institution of the sacred priesthood. And so, such a great Mass it is which we celebrate to start the sacred Triduum. And it all began with the Last Supper, of course, which Jesus celebrated the night before he died. And so also we, the night before the celebration of the Lord's Passion and his crucifixion and death, we gather to honor the institution of these two great sacraments of the Church. During this time of the Easter Triduum, which does begin with this Mass, we're commemorating the Lord offering himself for the salvation of the world. He is the sinless, spotless Lamb of God who is sacrificed for the forgiveness of sins. We know that in the ancient Old Testament times, of course, various animals were sacrificed as a reparation for the sins of the people, be they lambs or calves or goats. But as the book of Hebrews says, the blood of animals never is able to take away sins. And so Jesus had to come as the fulfillment of all of those sacrificial gifts of old to actually accomplish and bring about the real forgiveness of sins of the entire human race. And St. John tells us in this gospel reading a very beautiful line which caught my attention and which I also mentioned at Mass this past Sunday on Palm Sunday. Jesus loved his own in the world, and he loved them to the end. Such a beautiful line, the way John, the disciple of love, sums up Jesus' whole public life. During his whole public life, every word that he spoke, every miracle that he performed, every act was always an expression of God's love. Jesus is the love of God that he brought to earth. And as St. John says, he was faithful to the end. Faithful to that love to the very end. Even his suffering and his death, then, is an act of love, offering himself as a gift to the Father. He loved his own in this world, and he loved them to the end, the gift of himself on the cross. And so also that means that the event of the Last Supper is an expression of God's love also. The institution of the Holy Eucharist and the sacrifice of the Mass, an expression of God's love for humanity. The institution of the sacred priesthood to continue the sacrifice, the one sacrifice of Christ through time, another expression of love. Everything, from the first moment of his conception to his glorious resurrection and ascension to heaven, he loved everyone to the very end, and everything is an expression of that love of his. And lest we think that we are just commemorating a past event, let us remember that Jesus instituted the Eucharist as the living memorial of his passion, crucifixion, death, and resurrection. It's not just a past event that we're looking back into time, but it's an event that is present here now due to Jesus' own design, his own plan for the salvation of his people, to make his saving work of Calvary present here now in the holy sacrifice of the Mass. It is the same sacrifice, of course, as the Church teaches, the same sacrifice which is continued in time, not more and multiplication of sacrifices, but the one sacrifice of Jesus, of course, which is offered again at every Mass. So we say that Christ is saving us now at this Mass, because he has extended forward in time his sacrifice by means of the Mass. He is present here now. His same sacrifice is offered, and we are able personally to offer that sacrifice to the Father. And so he is continuing the work of salvation among us right now. Such a beautiful concept, and I know it's a deep theological concept, but that's the teaching of our church, and it's the truth. That's also the prayer that's prayed during this Mass, reminding us of the salvific power of the Mass. Whenever the memorial of this sacrifice is celebrated, the work of our redemption is accomplished. It's accomplished now, in our presence, and our heart is open to enter into that saving act of Christ. And that is why, of course, the Mass is so important. It's the central act of worship of the Church, and why this Mass of the commemoration of the Lord's Last Supper is so important for us, commemorating the institution of the Holy Sacrifice, which is saving us now, commemoration of the institution of the sacred priesthood of Christ. His one sacrifice, his oblation for the forgiveness of sins, is made really present for us personally to offer to God through the hands of the priest. Salvation is happening now as Jesus' one sacrifice is offered. So we enter into an event which is of cosmic, universal import and significance at every single Mass. And it all began at the Last Supper by Jesus' plan. So on this Holy Thursday, at this evening Mass of the Lord's Supper, let us imitate Jesus, who loved his own to the end. And let us make an offering of ourselves to God and in service to others. And the grace of Jesus in this Holy Mass does make such sacrificial love on our part possible.